Welcome back to our third video in our franchise fundamentals series. In this video, we're going to go over the cost and fees that are associated with a franchise investment. So this is a very important video because at the end of the day, picking a franchise, you have to weigh in what the actual costs are and understand what the fee structure is, because it does vary from brand to brand. So as much as you do want to find a franchise that matches with your criteria, has the same ability to achieve your goals and ideal ownership, but all that hinges on finances. Because at the end of the day, if you can't afford the franchise, or at least can't comfortably afford the franchise, it's not going to be an ideal investment for you. So today we're going to be breaking down what all the costs and fees are associated with the franchise investment to ultimately help you pick a franchise brand that is best suited for what you're looking for. We're going to start by going through the financial requirements that you're going to see from the franchisors as you're exploring their model. We're then going to go into the initial investment and really understanding what that is and what that means. Then moving into ongoing fees that you'll see as you're moving forward with your franchise investment. Last, we're going to go through some scaling and understanding what it costs to actually scale the specific business that you're looking at. And finally, we'll wrap up with what are some red flags and fee structures that you really want to pay attention to avoid a bad investment. So the first piece I wanted to discuss today is financial requirements. So as you are talking or looking at specific franchise brands, each is going to have a certain financial requirement that they're going to have in order for you to engage in conversation and explore their model. So the reason why they have these financial requirements in place, they know how much the franchise is going to cost. So they want to make sure that anybody who's looking to explore their model is financially healthy enough to engage in their business model. So it's really a protection mechanism on both sides. They don't want someone to be over leveraged or be in over their head with the financial investment. And from the franchisor's perspective, they don't want to waste time with people who really can't afford their model. So that's why they have these financial requirements in place. So there's two main financial requirements that you're going to be seeing, one being the liquidity requirement and the other being the net worth requirement. So with the liquidity requirement, that's what the franchisor wants to see in terms of liquid assets. Now, these are a little bit more loosely defined, but the liquid asset is really anything that can be accessed in a week or less. So obviously cash on hand is definitely part of that. Any sort of stocks that could be sold and realized within a week's time span. And some brands will also factor in retirement accounts because there are funding programs or lending programs that allow for you to tap into retirement accounts and treat it as a liquid capital asset. So that is not going to be what you're spending on day one. So if you see a liquidity requirement of $150,000, that they just want to see that you have $150,000 in liquid assets. They don't necessarily, or they're not going to expect you to stroke a check for that on day one. They just want to make sure that you have that in your liquid assets, specifically in cash. That would be the most ideal. Now with the net worth requirement, that is really just to simply put your assets minus your liabilities. So if you have $1 million in assets, but you have $900,000 in loans on those assets, net worth being $100,000. Usually the net worth requirement is going to be larger than the liquidity requirement. Might be a little more obvious, but again, these are a financial litmus test to make sure that you are well qualified and financially healthy enough to at least engage in a conversation to learn about the specific franchise model. The second piece I wanted to talk about is what the franchise fee is, and then comparing that to what the royalty is, because this is a common mix-up with people who are not as familiar with franchising. Most of the time when people hear the term franchise fee, they're assuming that this is the royalty that they're going to be paying on an ongoing basis. So just to clear this up, the initial franchise fee is a one-time buy-in, if you will, and it's anywhere from $50,000 to say $100,000 per territory. Okay, so it is based on territory or location. So if assumably the franchise fee is for a single location, if you're looking to buy multiple territories right from the beginning, that's going to scale up. There's usually a built-in discount. If the initial franchise fee is $50,000, usually the second territory will be only say 10 or 15,000 more, and that'll be true for additional territories that you purchase after that. But that is the initial buy-in. So one-time fee buys you the rights to be able to use the brand, operate under their systems and protocols, and access the support that the franchisor has for you. Now, the royalty, on the other hand, and I think is the more important piece to look at, that is the ongoing fee that you're going to pay to corporate, and that's how corporate makes their money. So the royalty amount is usually based off of top-line revenue, and we've discussed why they do it off top line revenue versus bottom. Different conversation to be had, but the royalty is the more expensive piece because that is going to be ongoing, and it's again a portion of your top line revenue. Typical royalty fees range from 6 to 9% on a very general level. So that's the fee that you're going to be paying in perpetuity, which is ultimately how the franchisor makes their money. Now let's move on to the initial investment. Now, the initial investment is all of the costs that it's going to take in order to get you not only up and running, but the goal of the initial investment is to break down the cash outlay to get you to being cash flow positive, where the business starts to generate enough revenue and profit to be self-sustaining. So the initial investment is not going to be just the franchise fee and the purchase of, say, your first trucks if you're looking at a home service industry business, or the initial build out of a brick and mortar location. That's a part of it, but they also factor in other pieces like cash reserves, 3 to 6 months of rent and insurance payments. And again, the whole point of the initial investment is to give you a realistic cash outlay of what it's going to take from opening the business going all the way to becoming cash flow positive. The nice thing about franchises is they have to produce a document called the FDD, or the Franchise Disclosure Document. The next video, we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but for the scope of this video, the FDD breaks down the entirety of the franchise offering into standardized sections. Now, one of these standardized sections is called the Item 7, or the estimated initial startup costs. This is going to be what you want to explore to really understand what that initial investment looks like. They break it down in a line item format, going through everything top to bottom to get you, again, from opening to being cash flow positive. So that's going to be the realistic expectation for you as to how much this is going to cost to get started. Now, as you're looking at these item 7s, you're going to see that there's a lot of times a huge range. Sometimes the initial investment can range from $150,000 all the way up to $400,000. You might think, okay, well, that doesn't really help me. What's that really telling me? And that's where it's important to look into the details. So if we're going to use home service as an industry for this example, they might factor in within that range, are you going to finance your equipment or are you going to purchase it outright? That obviously is going to drastically change what the initial investment is going to be. So you want to see exactly what they're saying. If they're saying it's going to cost $150,000, and that's with buying the trucks outright, it's a lot different than if they're assuming you're going to be financing them, because you're going to have to factor in that finance payment. In addition to that, another part that goes into this reason as to why there's such a range is geographic location. No matter what business you're in, if you're going to open up in New York City versus a more remote area in the Midwest, it's going to cost more. So they need to factor that into this initial investment section and make it encompassing of the entirety of the US. So that's another thing you want to factor in, is in your specific market. Is it a more expensive area? Is it a little more of an affordable area? Of course, talk with the franchisor to really get an idea of your location and where you're going to fall within that range of initial investment. But ultimately, that should give you an idea of what the initial investment is and how it pertains to you and your specific location. Next is ongoing fees. So there's another section in the FDD, the item 6, which is right before that item 7, of course. But that is the breakdown of the entirety of the fee structure for the specific brand. Now, Before you get all excited when you look at your first FDD, it's going to look like a laundry list of fees that the franchisor is going to have outlaid for you specifically. All of those fees are not going directly to the franchisor's cash in their pocket. The one that definitely is the royalty. And that's usually going to be the most important one, because when you're talking about percentages of top line revenue, those numbers can get big pretty quickly. So the royalty is the main ongoing fee that you want to pay attention to. Now, in addition to the royalty, some other key pieces to look out for are going to be a brand fund or a national marketing fund. Different franchisors will label that a different piece, but it's the same thing. That is an additional, you could look at it as a royalty. It is a percentage of top line revenue. Usually it's less than 2%, 1% is very common. And the whole point of that is the money that is going into that or going towards that fee is not going to the franchisor as revenue or profit for them. They have to hold that in a separate account where all franchisees are contributing, and the point of it is to have a collective benefit to the system as a whole. So for brands like Dunkin' or McDonald's, all the franchisees that are paying into that brand fund will go towards a Super Bowl commercial, which no franchisee would be able to afford on their own. But of course, with everyone pooling their money together and collectively investing in the piece, it benefits all franchisees. Now, for brands like, say, a home service business, maybe a Super Bowl commercial doesn't make the most financial sense for that spend of the dollars. So another example of what that brand fund might go towards is a system-wide improvement, such as a software update or adding to the SEO of the website to help generate more leads more ubiquitously across the country. But the brand fund is a percentage of top-line revenue. Not all brands have it. A lot of them do. But that is not going to the franchisor as profit, and it's important to know that that is going to be a reinvestment piece that, again, is pooled from all franchisees. Now, with other ongoing fees, there's usually a number of them, like I said, but they're all usually pertaining to the business in some capacity, such as software fees, technology fees, payroll, other things. Realistically, a lot of those fees are fairly standard, or at least standard for that business model. And again, understanding that those are not just fees that are going to be paid to the franchisor in terms of income. They're part of the natural costs of owning a franchise. You're going to need to use the same software as the franchisor if you need scheduling. There's going to be certain technology requirements that you're going to have to add into. So all of that to say that the fees, the ongoing fees, they're all pertaining to how the business is going to be operated. They're not all profit for the franchisor, but they are going to vary greatly from brand to brand, and that's why you can't compare apples to apples in franchising. The FDD allows for you to compare as closely to apples as possible, but that item 6 is going to give you a very good idea of exactly what all the fees you are going to see as you're moving forward with the franchise business. The next piece I want to talk about is the cost of scaling with any specific franchise brand. Now, a lot of people overlook this because it's not there's no explicit outlay in terms of what the cost is to scale. This is where you really need to understand the unit economics and what it's going to take to really grow this operation. This is very common in, say, the brick and mortar space. Just say you have a beauty concept. Let's call it hair cutting. You have a hair salon and it costs $800,000 to get one location open, and that's very good. That's awesome. You do well with that. If you're going to open up a new location, you have to factor in that's another $800,000 that you're going to have to put into that. So if you're looking to dominate a local market and it has the potential to have 10 locations there, you don't want to look at the initial investment and think, okay, 800 grand, I can get in and I can really dominate this market. That's how you start and you get in. But in order to scale into what goals you actually have, you want to know what that is going to look like. This is also true with home services or service-based businesses in general. I have one specific dog grooming franchise. They're very good. They're a great business model. But if you look in their FDD, you'll see that you really need 8 to 10 trucks in order to produce some serious cash numbers. Now, that's not an issue, but when you have a van or a truck that costs almost 100 grand because it's a specialized vehicle, and you're going to need 8 to 10 of those in order to really dominate a local market, that's another piece you want to factor in. So even though the initial investment says 250 to 300, that might be for 1 or 2 trucks to get you started. And then as you're starting to grow and you're adding trucks into the fleet, you need to factor in the cost of expansion. So when I mention this, I want you, when you're looking at a franchise model, to obviously see what the initial investment is going to be. But you want to look at, what are you looking to do? If you just want a small local mom and pop type or operation, totally fine. The initial investment is going to get you there. But if you really want to grow and dominate a local market, you want to ask the questions: what are the costs going to be? How many trucks? How many locations am I going to need? So that way you can really factor that into the overall financial investment you're going to be making. Now, I wanted to finish this video up by highlighting that not all fees are good, and certain franchisors can exploit franchisees with ridiculous fees. One example of this is Quiznos. Quiznos was one of the largest franchises in the country, specifically in the QSR, quick service restaurant space, but they arguably weren't the best or most ethical franchisor. And how that translated to the fees was Quiznos would acquire some of the manufacturing equipment pieces that they would sell to the franchisees, and they were putting markups on that. All of the food that the franchisees would order would have to be ordered through corporate, which they were marking up and making an additional profit on them. Now, because they went that route and got greedy, it really hurt the profitability of the local franchisee. So that's not saying that all franchisors are going to do that. And you really need to harp on the validation calls, which is when you get to speak to current franchisees before you're asked to make a decision about moving forward. You really want to ask them how the fee structures are. Do they feel like there's any predatory fees? Are there any fees that are a little ridiculous that corporate has? And then address that with corporate in your unit economics call. So that way you have a clear understanding of how their perspective is on the certain fee. Because when you have something like food, it is important to have consistency across the board. It makes sense that all of McDonald's franchisees have to buy their fries from corporate, because when you go to a McDonald's, you want to have the same fry every time. So it's not a bad thing that the franchisor will require franchisees to make purchases through them for brand consistency and standards. But if all franchisees you're talking to when you're doing your validation calls are saying, hey, I don't necessarily know what it is, but I feel like I can get these products at a cheaper clip, and corporate makes us purchase them through them, and it's really hurting our profitability, you want to factor that in, because that is a red flag. The franchisor is trying to take more from their franchisees than they should be, and that's going to affect their long-term health and longevity being in the industry. So hopefully that helps you to understand, first, what types of fees exist in the franchise space. Second, what the initial investment is, what it means, and how you should interpret it. You definitely want to understand the cost of scaling specifically to your goals, and then ultimately some red flag fees to watch out for. And again, you can really figure out a lot of where they're going to be when you're talking to current franchisees during validation. If you found this video helpful, make sure to tune in to our next video, video 4, which is going to be a full breakdown of what the FDD, or franchise disclosure document, is, how to understand it and interpret it, and the most important section to pay attention to. So I hope to see you over in the next video.